I'm 26, a new mom to twin boys, and I was supposed to marry my college sweetheart Alex last week in a fairy tale Hamptons wedding. We had a rocky start to parenthood. He hadn't wanted kids, but I stood my ground. He seemed to come around, becoming a doting father and a loving fiancé, or so I thought. The night before our wedding he called me, full of love and anticipation. Then he forgot to hang up. What I overheard next, a brutal conversation with his wealthy, controlling parents, shattered my world. He wasn't marrying me for love. He was being coerced, threatened with disinheritance. The entire last year of my life, his proposal, his affection, it was all a lie. This isn't just a runaway bride story, it's about uncovering a web of deceit, gaslighting, and the codependency a son has with his narcissistic parents. Watch how I took back my power, protected my children, and left them all to face the consequences of their HETs in their empty, opulent ballroom. The scent of salt air and expensive hydrangeas, usually a comforting aroma associated with summer weekends at my fiancé Alex's family estate in Southampton, now felt like a cruel mockery. I'm Clara, 26, and until last week I was blissfully, naively, planning my wedding to Alex, also 26, the man I'd loved since our sophomore year at NAU. We even had one-year-old twin boys, Leo and Max, a surprise that had initially rocked our world but had, I thought, ultimately brought us closer. Our journey to the altar hadn't been smooth. When I found out I was pregnant, Alex was less than thrilled. That's putting it mildly. He was adamant he wasn't ready for kids, that it would derail his burgeoning career in finance, that we were too young. His parents, the formidable Harrison and Eleanor Ainsworth, titans of old money and East Coast society, were even more horrified. They'd envisioned a different path for their golden boy, one that involved a suitable, pedigree-approved wife after he'd made his first billion, certainly not a surprise pregnancy with his college girlfriend. But I stood my ground. I've always had a fierce maternal instinct, a deep-seated desire to be a mother. I told Alex, my heart breaking but my resolve firm, that I was having these babies, with or without him. I gave him an out, no strings attached, no demands for child support. I was prepared to do it alone. It was only then, faced with the reality of losing me and his unborn children, that he seemed to snap out of it. He apologized, profusely. He promised to be there, to be a good partner, a good father. And for a while he was. He was surprisingly attentive during my very difficult twin pregnancy. After Leo and Max were born, he was hands-on, changing diapers, handling late-night feedings, his initial reluctance seemingly replaced by a genuine, doting love for our sons. 6 months after their birth, he proposed. A stunning diamond, a heartfelt speech about family and forever. It felt like a dream. The earlier conflict, his parents' thinly veiled disapproval, the arguments about readiness, it all seemed to melt away. I believed we'd weathered the storm. I thought love, and our beautiful boys had conquered all. His parents, while never overly warm, even seemed to soften, throwing themselves into planning a lavish wedding that would be the talk of the Hamptons. All was forgiven, or so I believed. I was a fool. The night before our wedding, the illusion shattered. As is tradition, Alex was staying at his parents' sprawling cottage, a euphemism for a 20-room mansion, a few miles down the beach from the smaller guest house where I was staying with the twins and my maid of honor, my sister Sarah. Around 10 p.m., Alex called. His voice was warm, full of the boyish charm I'd fallen in love with. Hey, beautiful, can't sleep, just thinking about tomorrow. Can you believe it? In less than 24 hours you'll be Mrs. Ainsworth. I smiled, my heart fluttering. I can't wait, Alex. I love you so much. I love you more, Clara. Get some sleep. You need your beauty rest. We exchanged a few more sweet nothings, then said our goodbyes. I waited for the familiar click of him ending the call, but it never came. He must not have pressed the end call button hard enough, a habit of his I'd often teased him about. I heard his father, Harrison, speak his name. Alex? Was that Clara? Curiosity, a dangerous, insidious thing, got the better of me. I should have hung up, but I didn't. I stayed on the line, my ear pressed to the phone, a silent, unwilling eavesdropper. Alex's voice, when he replied to his father, was completely different. The warmth, the affection he'd shown me moments before was gone, replaced by a dejected, weary tone I'd never heard from him. Yeah, Dad. It was Clara. You still feeling the same way you were 2 days ago? Harrison asked, his voice a low rumble, devoid of any sympathy. Yes, Alex sighed, a heavy, world-weary sound. Then Eleanor's sharp, imperious voice joined the conversation. Alexander, darling, regardless of how you feel, you know what you have to do. This wedding is happening. Think of the family's reputation. Think of the boys. My blood ran cold. Regardless of how you feel. Alex's voice rose, a note of desperation creeping in. But it's not fair. You're coercing me into this. I'm not ready. I told you that. I wasn't ready for kids, and you both forced me to stay with her, threatening to cut me off. And now this wedding. It's all a sham. I don't love her like that anymore. Not enough to marry her. You're ruining my life. The phone nearly slipped from my numb fingers. I don't love her like that anymore. Each word was a shard of ice piercing my heart. The past year, his attentiveness, his proposal, his loving words. It had all been an act. A performance orchestrated by his parents. The gaslighting was on a monumental scale. They had all made me believe he had come around, that he genuinely wanted this family, this marriage. Harrison's voice was like steel. Don't be dramatic, Alexander. You have responsibilities. You made your bed when you got that girl pregnant. This marriage is damage control. It's about protecting the Ainsworth name and ensuring those boys have a legitimate claim. If you're ready to have children, you're ready to be a husband. End of discussion. You go through with this wedding, or you can consider yourself written out of the will and out of this family. It's for your own good, darling, Eleanor cooed, her voice dripping with false maternal concern. She's a perfectly adequate girl, if a little unpolished. And the twins are handsome. It will all look very respectable. Once you're married, you can make adjustments. But this wedding will proceed. Make adjustments? Did she mean he could have affairs? Live a separate life? The narcissism of these people, their utter disregard for anyone's feelings but their own, for anything but their precious reputation and control, was astounding. Alex, their son, was just a pawn in their game. And I, and my innocent children, were collateral damage. Alex started complaining then, his voice rising in a whine I recognized from his more petulant moments. Nobody ever cares what I'm ready for. I always end up dealing with things I'm not prepared for. It's not fair. Then, I heard a door slam. He must have stormed out, leaving his phone behind. Harrison and Eleanor continued their discussion, their voices cold and pragmatic. They talked about the optics, the necessity of the union, how Alex would come to his senses eventually. They sounded like they were discussing a business merger, not their son's life, not my life, not the future of their grandchildren. That's when I hung up. My hand was shaking so violently I could barely press the button. I was stunned, reeling, my world tilting on its axis. My beautiful, loving fiancé, the doting father to my children, was a liar, a puppet. His affection, his proposal, our entire life together for the past year, had been a carefully constructed charade, all under the coercive threat of his parents. The codependency he had with them, his inability to defy them even for his own happiness or the well-being of his children, was a revelation. For a few minutes, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The betrayal was a physical pain, a crushing weight on my chest. Yes, we'd had that awful argument when I first told him I was pregnant, but I truly believed he'd come around. He'd been such a good actor, a fabulous, convincing actor. My softening up during pregnancy, my willingness to forgive and believe in him, they'd used it all against me. Then, a cold, hard anger began to burn through the shock. How dare they? How dare he? Play with my life, my emotions, the future of my children, all for money and reputation? My sister Sarah found me minutes later, white-faced and trembling, the twins sleeping peacefully in their travel cots nearby. I choked out the story, the ugly, overheard truth. Her initial disbelief quickly turned to a furious protectiveness. "Clara, you can't marry him," she said, her voice firm. "You can't subject yourself or those boys to a lifetime with that family of vipers." She was right. This wasn't just about a reluctant groom. This was about a toxic family system, a lifetime of manipulation and control. I wouldn't be a pawn in their game, and I certainly wouldn't raise my sons in that environment. My decision was swift, absolute. I wasn't just calling off the wedding, I was running. Thankfully, the twins were with me. Sarah helped me pack, a whirlwind of frantic, silent activity. Diapers, formula, a few changes of clothes for the boys, whatever I could grab for myself. By 2 a.m., my car was loaded. The wedding venue, the flowers, the 5-star catering, it had all been paid for by the Ainsworths. They were loaded. Let them suffer the financial loss. It was their sham wedding, their consequence to bear. Before I left, I sent a single group text to my closest friends and family. "Wedding is off. We'll explain later. Please, do not go to the venue tomorrow. Do not contact Alex or his family. Trust me on this. I'm okay, boys are okay. We'll be in touch." I knew my people. They would trust me. They wouldn't question it. Then I blocked Alex, Harrison, and Eleanor on my phone. I took a deep breath, looked at my sleeping sons, their innocent faces so precious. And I drove. I drove away from the Hamptons, away from the lies, away from the man I thought I loved, towards an unknown future, armed with nothing but my children, a full tank of gas, and a heart full of righteous fury. I drove for hours, finally pulling into a nondescript hotel a few towns over as the sun was beginning to rise. Boys, bless them, had slept through the entire escape. I got us checked in, my movements numb, almost robotic. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a crushing wave of grief and exhaustion. The day that was supposed to be my wedding day, I spent in a sterile hotel room, alternating between numbly playing with Leo and Max, and staring blankly at the cheap art on the walls. I ate stale crackers and a bruised apple from my diaper bag. The contrast between this grim reality and the opulent celebration I was supposed to be a part of was almost laughably cruel. I cried until I had no tears left. I was devastated, heartbroken, but a new feeling was also beginning to emerge, a fierce, steely determination. I had to be strong. For my sons, they were the only thing that mattered now. After a day of hiding and processing, I knew I had to face the music, at least in terms of logistics. I dropped the twins off at my parents' house in Connecticut. They'd received my text and were waiting, worried sick but ready to support me unconditionally. Then, I drove back to the Hamptons, to the house Alex and I had shared before the pre-wedding separation. I needed to collect my things, our things, the boys' things, and I needed to confront Alex, or at least let him know I knew. He reacted just as I expected. When I finally pulled up to the house a day later, he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He was frantic, a strange mixture of panic and concern. I still couldn't tell how much of it was genuine and how much was an act for his parents' benefit. "Clara, where have you been? We've been worried sick," he exclaimed, rushing towards me. He launched into a rehearsed-sounding speech about how he and his family had waited for hours at the venue, how humiliated they were, how whatever I'd done was unacceptable, that cold feet weren't an excuse for such public shaming. I let him finish, my face impassive. "Then," I said very calmly, "I overheard your conversation with your parents the other night, Alex. The one after you called me." He stopped dead, his face paling. The confusion, then the dawning horror in his eyes was almost satisfying. He looked ashamed, genuinely ashamed for the first time. I didn't elaborate. I didn't scream or cry. I simply walked past him, into the house, and began to pack. He followed me, babbling apologies, excuses, trying to explain. I ignored him. I had nothing to say to him. He'd made his choice, or rather, his parents had made it for him, and he had complied. Now, I was making mine. I collected my essentials, the boys' necessities, and left without another word. I wasn't interested in being his wife anymore, or part of his toxic family drama. I just wanted to be a mother, a good one to my sons. That was almost a week ago. We haven't spoken since. I thought that was the end, but a few hours ago he showed up at my parents' house, begging to speak to me. My parents and my sister, who now knew the whole sordid story, were skeptical, to say the least. But I agreed to talk to him, one last time. Outside on the porch, while the babies were napping. I didn't want a scene. He apologized again for everything. He said he did love me, even if he wasn't ready for marriage yet. He said he loved the boys, that despite everything he'd said that night, he still wanted to be a part of our lives. He claimed his parents' threats had terrified him, that he hadn't known what to do. I didn't know what to believe. Could I trust him, after a year of elaborate lies? He'd been an incredible actor. He wanted to work things out to give us a second chance, without his parents' interference. Honestly, I don't know what to do. My head is spinning. I would like my kids to have a relationship with their father. But trust? That's a fragile thing, and he and his family have shattered it into a million pieces. For now, I need a break. This week has been a lifetime. Give our relationship a second chance? I just don't know. The week following Alex's appearance on my parents' porch was a whirlwind of emotion and agonizing indecision. He called, he texted, he sent flowers, all the classic moves of a man desperate to win back trust. His pleas were a confusing mix of genuine remorse, or so it seemed, and the ingrained entitlement of someone who'd never truly faced consequences. He kept emphasizing his pain, his fear of his parents, his difficult position. The narcissistic traits he'd likely absorbed from his parents were on full display. Even in his apologies, he managed to center himself. My parents, bless their hearts, were supportive but wary. My sister Sarah was more blunt. "Clara, he's a puppet. His parents pull the strings. Do you really want a lifetime of that? For yourself, or for Leo and Max?" Her words resonated. The thought of navigating co-parenting, let alone a romantic relationship, with the ever-present shadow of Harrison and Eleanor Ainsworth looming, filled me with dread. Their influence wasn't just about money. It was about control, about shaping Alex into their image, regardless of his own desires or the happiness of others. The codependency was so deeply ingrained in him. I spent a lot of time thinking, really thinking, about what I wanted, not just for my sons but for myself. The overheard phone call hadn't just revealed Alex's deceit. It had also been a brutal wake-up call about my own willingness to overlook red flags, to believe in the fairy tale even when the foundations were crumbling. I'd been so focused on his supposed transformation into a loving father and fiancé that I'd ignored the subtle signs of his continued subservience to his parents. After a week of this emotional tug-of-war, I knew what I had to do. It was one of the hardest decisions of my life, but also, strangely, one of the clearest. I agreed to meet Alex, not at my parents' house but on neutral ground, a quiet coffee shop in a neighboring town. He arrived looking hopeful, a small bouquet of my favorite lilies in his hand. "Clara," he began, his voice earnest, "thank you for meeting me. I know I have a lot to prove, but I swear." I held up a hand gently but firmly. "Alex, I've done a lot of thinking, and I believe you when you say you regret what happened. I even believe on some level that you care about me and the boys." His face brightened. "So you'll give us another chance?" "No," I said softly, "I can't. Not a romantic chance anyway." The hope drained from his face, replaced by a look of wounded disbelief. "But, why? I told you, I'll stand up to my parents. We can move away, start fresh. Can you, Alex?" I asked, my voice even. "Can you truly ever be free of their influence? The night before our wedding you were terrified of them. You were willing to live a lie, to marry a woman you admitted you didn't love enough, just to keep your inheritance and their approval. What happens next time they disapprove of something? What happens when Leo and Max want to pursue a path that doesn't fit the Ainsworth mold? Will you stand up for them then? Or will you crumble just like you did with me?" He had no answer. He just stared at his hands, a flush creeping up his neck. The truth of my words hung heavy in the air. "I need more for myself, Alex," I continued, "and I need more for my sons. I need a partner I can trust implicitly, someone who isn't afraid to be his own man. And Leo and Max deserve a father who will prioritize their well-being and happiness above all else, including his parents' expectations or his inheritance." This was me, finally establishing boundaries. Firm, non-negotiable boundaries. "So what are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm saying that we are over," I said, "but you are still Leo and Max's father, and I want you to be in their lives, a good father, a present father. But it will be on terms that protect them and protect me from your parents' influence." That's when I told him my decision. I was filing for full legal and physical custody of the twins. His reaction was explosive. "Full custody? Clara, you can't do that. They're my sons too. My parents will fight you tooth and nail. They'll hire the best lawyers in New York. They'll drag your name through the mud." "Let them try," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, fueled by a resolve I didn't know I possessed. "Because I have something they don't, the truth. And I have a recording of that delightful phone call, Alex. The one where your parents explicitly state they are coercing you into this marriage, where they discuss cutting you out of their will if you don't comply, where your mother calls me perfectly adequate and unpolished. I wonder how that will play in family court, or perhaps in the society pages of the New York Times if they push me too far." His jaw dropped, the color drained from his face. He hadn't known I'd heard everything, let alone that I might have proof. "This wasn't just a she said anymore. This was a tactical nuke. My revenge, if you could call it that, wasn't about malice. It was about self-preservation and protecting my children." "She would too." "You wouldn't," he stammered. "Wouldn't I?" I met his gaze, unwavering. "Alex, I will do anything to protect my sons from the kind of toxic manipulation your parents specialize in. If they want a war, they'll get one, but it will be a war they will lose very publicly." Or I paused, letting the alternative sink in. "You can convince them that a quiet, amicable arrangement where you have generous visitation rights, but I have sole decision-making authority regarding the boys' upbringing, education, and exposure to certain influences, especially theirs, if they value their precious reputation." The fight went out of him. He looked defeated, a puppet whose strings had just been cut. He knew I wasn't bluffing. The Ainsworths prided themselves on their pristine public image. The scandal of that phone call leaking, of their coercive tactics being laid bare, would be catastrophic for them. It took a few weeks of tense negotiations, mostly between lawyers, but in the end, they caved. Alex, to his credit, did manage to convince his parents that a public custody battle would be a disaster. Perhaps he finally found a sliver of his own spine, or perhaps they simply realized I held all the cards. We settled out of court. I was granted full legal and physical custody. Alex has generous supervised visitation, with the explicit understanding that his parents are not to be present during those visits, at least for the foreseeable future, and that any attempts to undermine my parental authority or expose the boys to their toxic ideology would result in a swift return to court, with my evidence in hand. It was a victory, but a bittersweet one. I had protected my sons, secured our independence, but I had also definitively ended any hope of the family I once dreamed of. The months that followed were about rebuilding. I found a small apartment back in the city, closer to my parents and my support system. I went back to work part-time, leveraging my marketing degree. My parents and Sarah were incredible, helping with childcare, offering emotional support, never once saying "I told you so." Alex surprisingly stepped up as a father within the new boundaries. During his visits, he was engaged, loving, focused entirely on Leo and Max. He seemed lighter, almost relieved, without the constant pressure of his parents' expectations dictating his every move. He even started therapy, something he admitted he should have done years ago. Perhaps there was hope for him yet, to break free from that trauma bond with his parents. I focused on my sons, on creating a stable, loving home for them, free from the drama and manipulation of the Ainsworth dynasty. I learned to be a single mother, to juggle work and childcare, to find strength I never knew I possessed. The learned helplessness I'd felt in my relationship with Alex, my tendency to believe his narrative, was replaced by a fierce independence. About a year after the wedding I ran into an old college friend who still moved in some of the Hamptons social circles. "You know, Clara," she said over coffee, "the Ainsworths are practically pariahs in Southampton these days. That whole runaway bride thing, well, rumors have a way of getting out. Especially when the bride had very good reason to run. No one says anything directly, of course, but Eleanor's not chairing any charity galas this year, and Harrison's been asked to step down from a couple of prestigious boards. It's all very quiet, but effective." I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't a malicious smile, but one of quiet satisfaction. My stand hadn't just been for me and my boys, it had, in a small way, exposed the cracks in their flawless facade. Sometimes the most potent revenge is simply living well, and allowing the truth to do its work. I'm still single, but I'm not lonely. My life is full, with my beautiful sons, my loving family, my supportive friends, and a career I'm slowly rebuilding. I'm stronger, wiser, and fiercely protective of my peace. The Hamptons wedding feels like a lifetime ago, a scene from someone else's movie. Alex and I co-parent civilly, for the sake of Leo and Max. He still hopes, I think, for a reconciliation someday. But I know, with absolute certainty, that chapter is closed. I've learned that true love doesn't require coercion, or threats, or the sacrificing of oneself for an inheritance. It requires honesty, respect, and the courage to stand on your own 2 feet. My boys will grow up knowing they are loved unconditionally, for who they are, not for what they can bring to a family name. They will be raised with integrity, with the freedom to choose their own paths, without the shadow of manipulative grandparents dictating their future. And that, for me, is the happiest ending of all. I didn't get the fairy tale wedding, but I got something far more valuable: my freedom, my self-respect, and the unwavering love of my 2 little miracles. And the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, even in the face of immense wealth and power, the truth and a mother's love can prevail. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch!